Walt Disney lied to investors, to shareholders about making money on Star Wars, and they ate it up. I can't believe this. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, this story just blew me away. You know, they've been in this proxy fight with the keeping the board how it is and losing all the money on all the things. Well, last month, this is in April, the Mouse House released a detailed 67-page report for investors that, and this is a quote, singing the praises of its chief executive Bob Iger in a bid to convince stockholders to side with him in a battle with activist investors, as Forbes' Caroline Reed put it, and Disney ended up prevailing over the activists. Nelson Peltz, I believe his name is.
That sounds right.
Yeah, I think that's it. I tried to download the file, the 67-page document. The link is dead. It just goes to the Disney homepage, so I couldn't read this myself. I had to rely on Reed's analysis of it. It's a bit technical, but the upshot, gentlemen, is that when calculating the studio's return on investment on things like Star Wars and the Marvel movies, the Avengers, Disney didn't factor in the $4 billion acquisition cost to buy Lucasfilm. And apparently it's a lot easier to show a profit if you leave out a major multi-billion-dollar expense. I'm no accountant, but that's the way it looks to me. And the critical drinker, who it's courtesy of him that I found this, said there's fudging the books and then there's just straight making stuff up. I cleaned that up a little. I hope that the drinker doesn't mind. Now, Bill, I wrote an article back in January on this because I had suspected that Disney wasn't making any money on Star Wars. And this article I wrote in January, my back of the envelope math was that the company had spent about $7.35 billion acquiring and producing the rights to Star Wars and then making the movies, making the TV series, all that, and had probably generated, and by the way, I was very generous in my estimates for their revenues. I mean, really overly generous. They may have generated a little less than $6.5 billion, so they probably lost, again, being generous, a little less than $1 billion on Star Wars over 12 years. And this is what blew my mind, Bill. If I'm wrong, why did Disney fudge the numbers to their investors?
Well, you said you're not an accountant, and I'm not a lawyer, but my term for this would be fraud.
Yeah. Oh. Let me include one other thing. In the fine print, according to this Caroline Reed at Forbes, in the fine print at the end of the 67 pages, they explained that they left out these major acquisition costs. But you had to squint to read it.
Yeah, so basically they have large sheets proclaiming false numbers, and then at the very, very end of the book, at the tiniest little type, it says, "By the way, the numbers we've given you are just complete malarkey." Accounting's a funny thing, and it's an amazing sleight of hand to see how easy it is to turn things around. United States is the richest nation in the world, has the highest GDP. Which is not true. The United States is the poorest nation in the world. If by any reasonable accounting you were to take a look at assets versus liabilities with a 35 or 38 trillion dollar deficit, we are the poorest country in the world by a very, very, very wide margin. But we don't mention that when we talk about things like GDP and American greatness. We don't look at the red ink on the ledger. It takes an awful lot to lose money on Star Wars, and Disney's put a great deal of effort into it and succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. It bears mentioning that this challenge to the board, I don't know if you would call it a hostile takeover, but certainly a challenge to the existing pathway, that the renegades who are out there trying to take over the board of Disney are trying to return Disney to what Disney wanted Disney to be. This is not a challenge from people that want to turn Disney into something else. This is a challenge from people that want to turn Disney back into what Disney used to be when they bought their stock in the first place. Disney has become the word's getting way too overused, but it's clearly the most woke entertainment entity on the planet, and it owns just about everything. It owns Star Wars. I'm pretty sure it owns Star Trek. It owns Marvel. and it has injected these progressive values into all of these properties to the point where the people who used to literally live, I mean, like when I say literally, I'm fairly close to being literally. Were a number of Star Wars fans whose lives were so much Star Wars that the next Star Wars movie or TV show was something that they would look forward
That's
to.
how
In
I
fact,
grew up. That was my childhood.
There are cases of people who were on their deathbeds, who had terminal diseases, and who asked for and were granted advanced screenings of the next Star Wars movie so that they could die in peace. Nobody cares about this anymore. We have in our Stratosphere Lounge show and our Stratosphere Studio shows, we have an ongoing debate about whether Disney can be turned around, Steve. But I got to tell you, I don't want it to be turned around anymore. The damage to this brand is so extensive and so intentional and so in your face and such utter not only disregard for their audience, but insulting their audience. Disney will go ahead and make absolutely fundamental changes to a well-beloved property. And when people complain about the changes, Disney, the corporation, will be the first one to officially come out and call its audience racists, homophobes, transphobes, all the rest of it, because they don't want Pinocchio to be a black lesbian, and this is the worst of Disney's crimes. It's not so much even the changing of these beloved practices, but the idea that anybody responding to these changes in a negative way has been demonized by this company. And I got to tell you, I don't miss Disney as a studio. I miss what Star Wars used to be. I miss especially what Star Trek used to be. But my major, genuine lament is that people are abandoning the theme parks in large numbers and going to Disney. Well, for me, it was Disney World because I grew up in Florida. But going to Disneyland or Disney World was magic. It was a magical experience. And if they keep this up, they're going to talk themselves right out of their magic kingdoms as well, I suspect.
Yeah, Bill, you reminded me of something. This is a little off topic. I'll mention it anyway because, hey, it's our show. To give you an idea of how far and how fast that the Avengers, the Marvel movies have fallen, we all know that the movie The Marvels, the chick flick, just bombed spectacularly. But what blew my mind is they spent all this money shooting the movie. Then they had to spend all this money doing reshoots because what they shot had a lot of woke stuff in it, apparently, that wasn't testing well. And they still ended up with a movie that was only 88 minutes long, including credits. And, these Marvel movies, they tend to go 2+ hours, sometimes even 3 hours. So what I suspect is they spent all this money on the reshoots. They still ended up with the usual 2-hour movie. They looked at the results and went, uh-oh. We got to start cutting.
Wasn't Batgirl a Disney production? No, DC belongs to somebody else, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I don't. And Paramount owns Star Trek still, but I can't remember who owns Paramount because they've been trying to sell themselves off to somebody.
Just so the audience may not be up with this, our audience may not be up with the details of this. One of these studios spent, $100 million plus on Bat. It was either Batwoman or Batgirl. Maybe it might have been Batwoman. And they made the movie, and the movie premiered to the to the people that made the movie, and the studio buried the movie. They said, we are not only not going to release this movie, we're going to destroy the negatives. Now you think about that. You put $100 million into something, and you would at least think you could recover maybe 20 or 30 million of that over the lifetime of this thing. But they had determined that the level of political intrusion into that property would cause them more damage than they could possibly ever hope to recoup at the box office. And so it's not like it's a mystery, and it's not like they don't know. And it's not like Bob Iger doesn't know. They continue to put politics above what the audiences want to see. And if I was a Disney stockholder, I would call that criminal malfeasance.
Yeah. And maybe I'd like to know where the Securities and Exchange Commission is on this one. I don't think that's going to happen under this administration. Scott, so judging by what Disney did with their fake return on investment numbers and going by my back of the envelope thing, we can be pretty sure that Disney has lost money on Star Wars. The question, of course, is how. And I think Bill has talked about this with the political correctness, but the woke stuff. But even if you take that out, there's no real secret to telling a good story. And you're one of the better storytellers that I know in real life, that I've heard tell just great stories over the years. And it brought me to something that one of the Critical Drinkers guests said. It was the Outcast creatives Lance Steen, Anthony Nielsen, who I hadn't heard of before. He was a really sharp guy. He said, with an intellectual property like Star Wars, you would have thought you'd been able to turn a profit after 12 years, but I wonder why they haven't been able to do that. Could it be that the content's a bit garbage? Again, I cleaned that up a bit. Scott, there's no secret to storytelling. Why is it that so much of Hollywood seems to have forgotten how to do it?
Well, I think I go back to, I think it was, William Goldman, the guy who wrote The Princess Bride,
Yes.
who said...
Book on screenwriting.
Yeah, and a great book on screenwriting, said nobody in Hollywood knows nothing. And
nobody knows nothing.
That's right. So
great line.
This, even though the secret to really making a successful Hollywood film is a formula, whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah,
the formula is not that easy to execute. And I guess it's kind of like a recipe. I mean, my wife and I could be handed the same recipe and I would eat the outcome of hers, but she would probably be reluctant to eat the outcome of mine, as would I. And so there's so many ingredients and elements and people that have to come together to make a decent movie, even one that's not a $200 million blockbuster budget film. It's really hard to tell a good story well and get all those ingredients right with the actors and the relationship on screen and the actual execution of it all on film. And so, on the one hand, that's really tough. On the other hand, I don't know in the film business how you account for money invested in such a property as Lucasfilm, for example. If you spend $4 billion in 2012 on Lucasfilm for a property that you plan to exploit for the foreseeable future, over what period of time do you need to amortize that investment so that it plays out? It's been 12 years now. They've created a trilogy, a couple of spin-offs. They've created, a variety of merchandise and DVDs and Blu-rays and stuff like that. Were they expecting, and did they set the expectation among their investors that they would recoup the $4 billion in such a time frame? Or are they basically looking at that as such long-term seed money that they know they'll be able to mine that intellectual property for decades to come? And so it doesn't concern them, which is why they could argue we don't need to include that in the calculations. We're just going to look at the profit and loss created. I think at the very least, Steve, they should have included some sort of amortized amount in that. So you could say, hey, I don't have to account for all $4 billion.
I can help you out with that a little bit. I forgot to include this in the intro. I did include it in the article I wrote for PJ Media this morning. And that is their return on investment calculation doesn't just look back at the last 12 years. It also looked forward into the next 10 years and potential revenues that the company hasn't yet earned. So there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on here.
Yeah, so now that's the best fiction that Disney is creating, is looking forward 10 years in their financial books.
Hollywood?
But
Yeah.
I think in a general sense, you're correct. The term ROI means return on investment. And if you're going to show the return, I think you need to show the investment, whether that is as a lump sum based on all of the product that they've produced so far from that purchase, or if it is basically divvied out over time for the next 20 years. They need to reflect that up front. It should be in the headline, not in the footnotes.
Yeah.
Can I just add something
Please.
to that? If I had to guess, my feeling would have been that Disney's board would have thought that they would have recouped that entire $4 billion easily with the first trilogy that they made. That was their maximum timeline. because that's people had that kind of fervor for it. And Scott was talking about ingredients, Steve, but there's just one ingredient that makes Star Wars really. It's the main ingredient, and that's fun. And none of these things have been fun. And they're written by people whose entire political philosophy is not only not fun, but if you're having fun and you're a modern progressive, then you're not paying attention to great injustices that must be solved. And how dare you frivolously fritter away $200 million of hectoring that you could apply to a problem just by having fun. And, this kind of thing writes itself practically.
It really does. And, you talk about formula. People talk about formula. We talk about formula, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. One of my favorite rock bands, the Rolling Stones, has been doing the same formula since the early 70s by now. It took them a little while to settle in, but yeah. And they released a new album last fall. They're, Mick and Keith are both like 81, 82 years old, but guess what? They stuck to the formula. They executed it well, and it's a Hackney Diamonds is a solid Rolling Stones album. AC/DC, same thing. They've had the same formula since the mid-70s, and every AC/DC album is solid because they execute on the formula, and I like that. And
Right Angle.
Since 2009, indeed. So yeah, we've been at this a while. The key is in the execution, but the secret, the secret sauce that they really seem to have forgotten, it's not a big secret. Give us characters we can identify with. That is, they can't be Mary Sue's, they can't be perfect. They have to be relatable. They have to struggle. Put them through hell on the way to a happy ending. And if it's Star Wars, blow stuff up in between. That's it. That's all you have to do. And you know what? I love my lightsabers. I love my Death Stars blowing up. If they could just get back to the formula, if they could produce the Hackney Diamonds of Star Wars movies, I'd be right back there. But until then, I will not save you the aisle seat. And that is your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks for watching, folks, and we'll see you next time.